5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
So use all that is fortune. Most men gamble with her.
Sorry. Oh shit.
Did I say most mammal with her?
I don't know, but all right, hold on.
So use all that is called fortune. Most men gamble with her and gain all and lose all as her wheel rolls. But do thou leave as unlawful these winnings and deal with cause and effect, the chancellors of God. In the will work and acquire, and thou hast chained the wheel of chance, and shalt sit hereafter, out of fear from her rotations, a political victory, a rise of rents, the recovery of your sick, or the return of your absent friend, or some other favorable event raises your spirits, and you think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. So that's the end of Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. We got Mynaa Miesnowan here today. Welcome back.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we did an 8-part series on self-reliance. Well, guess what? We're not done yet. We've got a wrap-up episode today for you all. This is probably going to be the best episode yet because we've got original thoughts here. We've got things that are really tying everything together with what's going on today, here and now, with America, with you, a citizen. We've got a lot of shit today that no one's talking about. So I appreciate you coming on to listen to this, and let's go right into it, right?
Yep. So we began just there with where we left off, the end of the essay. He says use all that is called fortune, and Fortuna is Roman goddess of luck and fortune, right? In that mythos. And he says it use all of her, right? He's not restricting you or defining what that is, right? If there's something to it, if there's a method and or a tool, he's not telling you what to do with it or how to use it, right? So that's important to note, and maybe this is another reason why Nietzsche says we lost a philosopher, not Emerson, because he draws a line, but he's not going to tell you what to do. And Nietzsche kind of does this in his own right. If I put it like that, does that make sense?
No. Yes. And if they
right, he didn't make it easy. He didn't make it easy. He didn't explain it simply. I mean, yes. He gated himself, right? He definitely wrote to mystify and bewilder, and to impress and to shock and to express a lot of things. But it wasn't as simple as like, oh, here's the answers, here's the reasons, here's why you should do as I say and do as I do. And, I mean, it's there, but it's
hidden.
Yeah, it's not. It's just, there's some gateless gates in there. And it's like, if I guess we'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they were to just tell you all like,
well, it'd be pointless. I mean,
it would go against everything that they've taught, right? It would go against what they are as people, what they preach, right? And it wouldn't.
Yeah, to a point. I mean,
if it appeals to everyone, then it doesn't appeal to the right people.
Well, I mean, that Nietzsche was done with preaching to a point,
Yeah.
Or at least the old madness. Right. When we talk of ideas and expressions and thoughts and beings that, it's mostly out of the cave ages, right? Out of our earlier steps in evolution.
Yes.
Where we thought we were somehow separate from this earth and that we were some other creature that was destined for somewhere else, or, whatever it was we were expressing. Many things, but that's a podcast of itself. So the other, next he says, most men gamble with her and gain all and lose all as her wheels roll, right? Just like it's dumb chance or dumb luck. But do thou leave as unlawful these winnings, right? Like don't play like that, and deal with instead cause and effect, the chancellors of God. And the funny thing about cause and effect is we know now that, like our causes don't follow the universe's effect, and kind of vice versa. If you wanted to stick to it, it's like either way, our understanding breaks down at a certain point. Right? We've discussed all this before.
Yes.
Without getting into it here. But this part's interesting too. In the will, work and acquire, right? So he's saying in the will, right? That would be your will, work and acquire there. Over there you are, your will, working and acquiring, and thou hast chained the wheel a chance and shall sit hereafter out of fear of her rotations, right? So this is no longer dumb luck to you. This is no longer mere fate.
And well, there's
here,
also the because I kind of want to bring something up before we kind of get into it, because
sure.
so regardless, because the free will debate, it's useless, right? And why is it useless? Because you can't prove whether or not you have free will or not. It's a dumb question. But
it's not a matter.
What you can do is decide that you have a will. You can decide that you are something, and you can just go for it. That's what you can do, and that's what's important.
Right. Well, that reminds me of Emerson saying whim. It's like, you settle on, he said, I hope it's more than whim, but you settle on something because we don't have all day. Whatever this expression is. I like this Nietzsche elaborated, as we've expressed here before, that it's not a matter of free will, it's a matter of weak and strong wills. So, to otherwise project what is a physiological matter, more like closer to an akin of, it's animal expression more than it is any kind of self-willed or, what would we call it? Self-possessed sort of being,
Yeah, like we own ourselves.
Yeah, like, that it's not so apparent, and that it's, the notion that, whether we're free or not, either way, maybe you could say, okay, it comes with caveats, right? And we're going to get into that.
Oh yeah.
So
that
a political victory, a rise of rents, recovery of your sick, right? Some favorable event raises your spirits and you think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it, and I don't, I think it's kind of beyond the dichotomy of pessimism and optimism.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, I'd say, sight or understanding.
Yes. Well, it's acknowledging that
well, these things don't solve none of this solves our problems once and for all. None of it's like, okay, life's in the back, like you dust your hands, you wipe your hands off and it's done and over. It's like, nope. And then the next day and then the next day, till death do you part.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can wear a mask or wash your hands all you want, but grandma's still going to die. So
yeah,
maybe not that morbid, but at the end of the day, you can do all you can to prepare to prevent the inevitable and conserve what you love. But what you love is still going to die, still going to perish.
Right. And it's that mortal fear touched us in a very particular way, and the way that's expressed over time. I guess it's the birth of tragedy.
Yeah, well, it's not that you shouldn't, try to prevent the inevitable. It's not that you shouldn't try to conserve what you love, but it's more so that you have to acknowledge that these things are inevitable. That these that what you love will die. That you will die. That's the biggest part. Is the acknowledgement. And understanding why you want to conserve these things. So
Right. But that, yeah. And that's not really a part of our normal, would you say culture?
no.
Like, we don't like to talk about death. It's a very touchy subject. It's a very particular subject, and it's long, you know. I guess we have some stuff on this further down in the notes. So
Yeah.
we should keep moving here.
Yeah, it's there's that nothing can bring you peace but yourself, right? So I asked you, how do we be self-reliant in a world where everything is specialized, where we rely upon everything else to give us happiness, to give us love, to give us what we need in this world?
Right. To validate you, to give you a purpose or a reason to go on, and you can question why it's not enough or why it hasn't been enough, historically speaking, because we only have so many stopgaps in which to deal. I mean, think about it. If your life, if you felt in the gutter, or your life was in the gutter, you only have so many remedies, right? You could see a doctor, you could join a cult or a religion. You think about how do some people cope with existence. It's like, well, some people it's suicide, some people it's homicide, some people it's self-destruction in some capacity, whether it's immediate or like a slow burn effect over time through risky behavior or bad ideas, and having no regard for oneself. If you have no concern for yourself, or if you've come to treat yourself as a doormat or as disposable, because I suppose you could say, this brings to mind Ralph Waldo Ellison's book, The Invisible Man, where he talks about, the line of, owing irresponsibility to the degree that, if you can't reciprocate, then, that's, it might as well be tyranny. It might as well be anything else, especially, again, we've talked about the differences between expectations and demands, or hopes and demands. If I ask something and I get upset or mad, or especially if I take that out on you because you didn't answer the way I wanted you to, it's clearly a demand. It's clearly an order. And then I guess you could say there's a question of, are you in a position to accept that from me? Because there's a number of situations where you could think it's easy to accept that, a superior, a boss, or if it's you in that position for whatever reason, and you have the authority in whatever the situation may be. If it's a question of deference, it's like, well, you could say, is it necessary, or does it benefit? And then, I guess this is all rooted in rank and order, right? It's incontrovertible, despite talking about self-reliance. Even Emerson covered these things. We already talked about the pre-Socratic philosophers. We already talked about, a lot of these thinkers.
Yeah, and and a lot of this does rely on rank and order, right? Like, why do we read Self-Reliance? Why do we talk about Nietzsche? Why do we talk about Schopenhauer? Why do we talk about all these figures, right? Because we still need to pay homage to this rank and order. We still need to pay our respects to these people and educate people on what's going on, right? So,
right. Well, to a point. I mean, even if no one had heard of Emerson before today, and then someone just discovered him tomorrow, and then someone started going over it, the arguments, or I guess what's put forth would still stand, or would still need examination, or still demand your attention, you could say.
yes.
In terms of how powerful his words are, and it's, I'm not going to say, him and Nietzsche are the same or remotely the same per se, but I'm definitely going to say, at least in that vein, they share that much in common.
Yes.
In terms of, what are these guys saying? Oh, shit, they're talking to me. Like, they're talking to me, that's a funny thing. They actually speak as if they expect you to understand them.
Yes.
And there's a certain way of doing it. in which, you know, you can see when it's there and when you see when it's not.
But how many people
Because I
understand
see,
them
you
but
can
don't
see it in
want to?
dishonesty. You can see it in dishonesty, right?
Yeah.
Because the dishonesty is totally, you know, it's talking down to you, because then the thought is, you think you need a lie to win people over, or to make them believe you, or to make them hope in you. And, you know, and you could say that stands whether the person selling what they're selling realizes it's a lie. And I don't mean that cynically. I just mean the way we do business, I guess, these days, especially uh, in an age of mass marketing, right?
Yes.
Because that's been, you know, a large had taken a large toll on us, you know, for a long time standing. More things that, you know, play off our physiology, our weaknesses, and, yeah, I guess you could say our strengths too, but mostly weaknesses.
Yeah, and these things.
Well, I'd say the whole dichotomy, though, the
Yeah,
whole,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
because it's, you know, when you say self-reliance, it's not just outside yourself. It's you know, then because you know, Emerson had neighbors. You know, he worked on projects with other people, and other people helped him. You know, humans have always been social creatures. That's not really the point. That's not
Yeah, it's not about cooperation. It's about being yourself, right? It's about because you can collaborate with people, right? But if you're doing whatever everyone tells you to do, or if you're just acting the way you're acting because you think other people want you to act that way, then that's not self-reliance. Self-reliance is, yeah, you're going around other people, but you're being yourself. You're doing these things. You're being around these people because you want to. You're being around these people because you're being honest to yourself, because you are reliant upon yourself and not them for your happiness, for your passion, for your love, et cetera, right?
right. But, you know, we already have this kind of instilled and installed, you know, these belief systems, and just the way, I guess, way I'm trying to think of how you would word it. The way we, not just the way we express ourselves, but the way our culture was ingrained in on us over time, let's say, you know, so comparing old values to new values, or what are purported to be new values. And then I think of Nietzsche, you know, warning of the price and the danger of sticking to these old and dead value systems, you know, and it's probably best expressed when he says, you know, bite, you know, talking about biting the head off the snake, the shepherd, and thus spoke Zarathustra, you know, warning against that entire kind of a slave and master and oppressed oppressor mentality. You know, it's like you in that case, you have to, you're identifying as or with as a slave.
Yeah.
You know, and there's something to be said of the way our thoughts affect our physiology, the way our social status and our social nature directly affects our physiology, no different than any other
Well, that's like, if you think of
social
yourself as
animal.
a slave, you're going to be a slave, man. If you think that you're chained up, you're going to see the change. So that's the problem. That's the problem here, is that people believe that they're chained up, and
Right. And, well, I
they
mean,
feel chained up.
Emerson tried it. You know, he said, don't. He's like, no need to. What does he say? Like, no need to skulk about, or, you know, be some interloper. If do you remember the lines?
No, no, I don't remember.
Okay.
I could look it up though, if you want.
Yeah. Do you have it open?
Yeah, I do actually. Let's see.
Right.
What'd you say?
But
What'd you say?
I'd say, it's interloper.
Interloper.
You might have
Okay.
spelled it old English.
Yeah. Let a man then know his worth and keep things under his feet. Let him not peep or steal or skulk up and down with the air of a charity boy, a bastard, or an interloper in the world which exists for him, but the man in the street, finding no worth in himself, which corresponds to the force which built a tower or sculptured a marble god, feels poor when he looks on these.
Right. And he's being a dwarf of himself.
Yeah.
But so I could say, looking at the bigger picture, If the past formerly crept up from behind us as the future, now we're aware of this predicament.
Yeah.
Nietzsche illustrates this and poses a few good questions in his aphorism, The Heaviest Burden. And Emerson tells you in the last paragraph of Self-Reliance, on musings and thoughts as raiment, paraphrased as, basically don't put your eggs in these baskets. Don't bet on these horses. You think the good days are preparing for you, do not believe it. This makes me think, what we talked about before, what you said, something along the lines of hope is the antithesis to being and becoming. It's like a deference to elsewhere. It's a grease trap for our cognition. And basically it's repression.
Yes.
Yes.
I hope this will end. I hope I'll be saved. I hope this, I hope that.
Right. Tomorrow will be better. Next week I'll be in school. Then I'm going to work. And then, now I'm going here. Then I'm getting married. Then, right.
It's
for the next day.
It'll get better when this happens, right?
Right. Well, it gives you something to think about beside the present, right? It gives you, it's your escape clause. It's your way out.
Yeah.
That's repression.
We say, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Or you can console yourself with other people have it worse, or other people do have it worse. Therefore, you should feel bad. Back to the notion of we only have stopgaps in suffering. So what if therapy doesn't work for you? What if religion doesn't work for you? What if actually nothing on offer works for you?
Yeah, because the only thing that actually works is action. Taking action.
Yeah, well, you're creating your own medicine in that case, right?
Yeah.
You're doing your own prescriptions. It's not necessarily taught, though. So it makes sense in an age of decadence, if the tribe is falling apart, even though we did become civilization building creatures, not just tribal creatures. It's like, well, if the tribe is kind of going to shit, it would make sense that people have a hard time operating in that setting, when for far longer than not, as animals before we were humans to these creatures we evolved into now, that it's clear that like, oh, that's not so easily just displaced or sublimated. It's actually, people have a hard time acting and living and existing in this world without the certain, like, I think it's a certain barometer, it's a certain validation, it's a certain feeling, fundamentally it's physiological. Again, I think these are the roots of our nature, or the roots of definitely the roots of our mind, or what manifests in our mind is a result of our physiology. And this applies to Buddha as much as it does to Nietzsche, as much as it does to a scholar, a professor, or a layman,
Yeah. So why self-reliance? How self-reliance?
Okay, so what are the lines? Where are the lines? According to whose values? What are the alternatives? What are the costs? And the opportunity cost. It's the trade-off.
Yeah, well, the trade-off is everything. I mean, so if you're not self-reliant, if you're some like lying scumbag who's weak and lazy, and you don't want to be honest, you don't want to put in the effort to be honest, you don't want, like, you're too afraid to be honest,
right? But okay, but
be yourself.
Go on.
And you have to cross a lot of fucking lines to get to that point where you can be yourself, where you can be comfortable being you, where you can be comfortable relying upon yourself for everything you need, right? So
right. And it's not just, we're not thinking like physical, because it's not like, if you need a cup of water and you go and you turn the faucet on, it's like, if you were outside and you were desperate for water, you might drink out of a fetid puddle on the ground, right?
Good luck.
But the point is that, animals kind of have to do what they must, and they always have. And to me, that actually impulse and instinct is like one of the like impressive and, fun thing about animals is how ingenious they can be. And obviously, with us, I think of appreciation for novelty. And any animal that can appreciate novelty, is definitely intelligent.
Yes.
And then, in thinking about how this kind of plays out for the individual, because even if we think even if we were even for more social or tribal animal, and we could only think in terms of collectivism, and we were even better at it, that doesn't change the fact that, we don't feel I can't say that I feel as a, what do you call, a multiplicity of beings. I don't know what it's like to be a group of something. I know what things look like from my eyes. I know what I've seen with my eyes. I know what I've touched with my hands, things like that, what I've created with my hands. I can't say the same for the rest of the world.
Yes.
I can't so easily just marry myself into that, if you will. I can't dissolve myself into that because I only experience the world in terms of the way I feel and then the way I articulate. That, I guess that's the trade-off. It's like, okay, well, having said or felt or been or done that, it's like, well, here's my report on it, or here's what I have to say about it, or here's some thoughts on it. But thinking of consciousness over time is also disillusionment over time. Santa isn't real, the tooth fairy isn't real, on down the list. And then the notion is, if you formerly spent if your thoughts were formerly on Santa Claus and you realize it's a lie or it's just untrue, it's like, okay, now any energy or thoughts you had over there, you would put elsewhere, because that's a dead end. And an easy example is an athlete who has to quit due to injuries, and then what if let's say you have injuries, but they're not of the physical variety, it could well change your desires and pursuits, whether it's illness or change in your life or something failing or falling through, do you remember Emerson in Self-Reliance, the essay or the paragraph about, people lamenting, the youth's failures or people's failures. Saying like, oh, we make such a big deal about failure, and in reality it takes like a lot of heartache and pain to reach anything like, considered remotely enlightened or awake.
I mean, there was that story about that guy who wanted to be like a politician in Boston or whatever, in Self-Reliance. I don't remember how it went, but like they failed, and then they just sulked up in their failure for the rest of their life. And then he compared the other dude that failed. Then he failed again and again and again, and he kept trying anyways, because it didn't really matter. Like, who cares if you fail? I mean, it's
right. Well, that's
right. I mean,
to a certain point, because it's like, so I guess so long as you put in the work, because it really, I mean, I guess if I'd say if people understand life more than anything, they would understand that what they do fundamentally doesn't matter, to the degrees that they could be doing anything at the cost of anything else. Like, that's not, in terms of concerning yourself with that, it's kind of beside the point.
So have you ever gotten a participation?
It's a question
before?
I'd say it's a question of no, and if I did, I'd throw it away. Like, what's this?
Dude, I've gotten participation trophies before in elementary school, right? I wanted to throw them away, but my mom wouldn't let me. It feels like so shitty when you get a participation trophy and you know that you sucked. When you know that you sucked at the sport and they give you a trophy, it feels like a freaking slap in the face, dude. Right. So like,
it's patronizing. Yes.
In a sense, the participation trophy, it's worse than not getting anything. It's like way, way worse. It's beyond worse than not getting anything. So people are all like, oh yeah, I mean, participation trophies, they make people feel good even though they sucked. No, it makes them feel even worse about being shitty. So it's like, I don't know. So I'm like totally against them, because there's this, I mean, I won't get into it, but I mean, like in our society, we get all these freaking participation trophies in a sense. We get, oh yeah, thanks, I really like you, and because people lie to you. They lie to you about what you're good at. They lie to you about what's going on. And that's kind of the participation trophy, right? That's the gold star.
I think there's I feel like there's an aspect of that reflected in social media in general. Not just the pageantry of who's who, but collecting followers, like people like they're just, I don't know, like pins or medals, but that's the currency is the attention, hey, look at me, look what I can do.
Yeah. So just to be clear, with self-reliance, we're talking about something like radical. We're not talking about just like, oh yeah, I'm going to try being myself one day. I'm just going to be like, just try being a little bit more honest. It's like a total just being completely independent emotionally, philosophically, and spiritually. Sorry, I'm a little sick. I don't have the COVID, but
oh well, as I say, we might have to put you down if you did. Like the survival rate's pretty good actually. Nope, he got it.
See ya.
Let's see. So
so we are asking that people see it in themselves, their own safety, their life, their liberty, their passion.
Yeah, well, I'd say you could ask, where do you begin and where do you end? Where does your duty and responsibility? Not what you're supposed to do, what you're going to do. It used to be preached, your duty is to discern your duty, or your duty was foisted upon you. Once madness preached, right? And in general, for the majority of history, it's like, people have more or less been disposable and interchangeable. It's usually just inconvenient. And then the way we sublimate the story, provides the framework for our cultures. And, over time, we came to, hail these things as triumphs, do as we say and do as we do. Because it did work for, the organizational patterns of society, and they did serve a function, and they still do. It's just, I don't know that. Okay, I'll tell you this. I look around, and I've looked extensively to see what's out there, and no one actually has an answer to these. No government, no writer, no philosopher. Like, no one's actually posed like, oh, this is, with these, whether you're talking about technological changes and disruptions, or
There's not an answer though.
Modern gloominess and frustration, the rampant kind of nihilism and hate.
People demand answers.
Also the hatred for humanity.
Yeah, people demand answers, but there's not an answer. So what are they going to do? What are you going to do when a whole mob of people are asking you for an answer, but that there's no answer? What are you going to do, Mynaa?
Oh, well, you have to find your own answers. Yeah, if nothing else satiates, if nothing else works, and people try this with, you go to Stoicism, you can swallow rocks and scorpions and broken glass, and you can try and sublimate it through religion, whether it's foreign or domestic. But inevitably, it's like whether you acknowledge that you're following someone else because you couldn't figure it out on your own. It's not a flattering picture. And other philosophers depend. They have varying degrees of how they see and observe their philosophers. Like, one of my favorites has always been the Buddha, when he says, like a flower growing on the trash heap from the side of the road, the Buddha's disciple might come from over there. He's and it's an old expression that people are trash, but you never know where the genius might come from.
Yes.
And within us, it's like the resources are there, if depending on how one's constituted. There's not a guarantee that anyone can, tap into them, let's say, or make use of them, or is in a position to do so, or could figure it out on their own. But that's the importance of education and training and all these other things that we've long been doing, because it takes a long time to really train people to understand and to see the world. Yeah. The process begins really early. It takes almost 20, arguably it doesn't stop, but it's seen, people's attitude towards it, you can observe it. Like, it's just like, nope, don't need to concern myself with any of this. You could see how people throw it away. Like, oh, I've learned enough, or I think enough, or, like, it's always some of my favorite expressions, like, oh, don't think about it, or don't think too hard about it, or, oh, you're thinking too hard about it,
Yeah.
It's just such a confession. It's such a, it's such a, I think that's the real confession. And, and rightfully so, I guess maybe you could say we can only take so much. And the truth disillusionment can be painful. Arguably it is, and arguably it has to be.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to not talk about some stuff just to maintain peace. I mean,
okay. Well, we're gonna get into that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you want to, because I love my family, and there's people in my family that really disagree on some pretty high blood pressure topics, right? So when something's brought up, someone else has got to say, "Hey, we're not talking about that here, right? Let's just go back to being a family, okay?" And that's, I mean, I want to say, yeah, let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about it. But people aren't prepared to talk about stuff like that. People aren't prepared to relax, to chillax, and to
Right.
being willing to be open to other people's ideas, being willing to be calm when someone expresses you their opinion, right?
Right.
So,
Well, I mean, it's almost like, and if you can think about the degrees of violence upon which that reaction takes place of no, I don't want to hear it. No, I don't want to think about it.
yeah.
It's telling of, just an autoimmune response.
Yeah.
You don't even have to question it just to say no. I mean, there is something to like a will to stupidity or hermetically sealing your mind. That is to strike,
Ignorance.
when you are rolling the dice, when you are taking that chance, if other people say no, you're wrong, and you say no, I think I'm right, it's like, well, you might be, maybe you are right, maybe you're not. We act, you act like, if nobody knows yet, if that's unexplored territory, if there's no proof, then it's like, well, you're going to bear that out or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Could you kind of just elaborate on, like, what are we bearing out here? What are we doing?
Well, I guess it's a question of where do you begin and where do you end?
Okay.
Let's see.
Boobies and the merits of boobies.
Oh yeah, Kierkegaard. Well,
yeah. So so when we were writing these notes, I wanted to see if mine.
It's fine. Let it be. They don't have to know. They don't have to suffer. We've here. We'll keep stepping back, and then we'll bring it back around again. Okay.
Okay.
So through a lot of this, we've been discussing, great thinkers, not scholars, not intellectuals, great thinkers, Nietzsche, Emerson, Heraclitus, and the reason is because their hypotheses have borne out over time and time again through experiments in human civilization. When Heraclitus says, look at the people, they're as if asleep or drunk, these are observable things.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, you told me that, you said the disciples can't stay awake. It's like, yeah, they're the dreamers following someone else's artistic vision, whether they can't create the vision themselves or, whatever the case may be, they're following someone else, but they can't keep up with the actual artist. In this case, we're talking about, you mentioned disciples. I assumed you meant Christ. Yes. But it applies to pretty much all similar situations, according to their dynamics. So in the case of the sensuality, being able to observe it, you can run a breathalyzer to see just how drunk somebody is, but it's sensually apparent. You can see it, you can smell it, and I imagine Heraclitus, his mind kind of burgeoning into consciousness, some 2,500 years ago. And I imagine his horror and his upset as he realizes, holy shit, these people, they don't see anything at all, and none of the books had been written, and they didn't even have, thousands of years of Greek or Roman or Christian history and supposition and, you could say societal improvements in in organizational patterns, and in terms of how can we best lay out our civilizations and express ourselves and do what we need to do to survive. At the same time, he observed that, okay, we're asleep at the wheel, and these men were working with their own tools and methods, their own volition. They were individual philosophers before the evolution of the systematic and mass control oriented philosophers. The people who were concerned with, oh, this is, we've discerned what's proper and we can operate based off of that. And, this is according to natural law or God, or, in the order that happened through history, right? As we kind of, as the philosophers over time tried to discern what exactly was taking place here. And, it varied from systems thinkers to economics to people concerned with human consciousness itself, but it's quite, it's not like, out of all of that, it's not like anyone's put together like, oh, there it is. Like, this is the method, this is the way, right? And not that there is one. That's the joke of it, is like, no matter how many times people try and teach it, this is the way, or especially, most absurd, the only way. Right. Like in exclusive to a lot of cults and religion is that teaching of like, oh, no, it must be done like this, and people who think that way, right, it's very shallow. It's very limiting. It's because they were taught to think that way. Like one of the worst things you could do is say, nope, it's only this. It's like, how are you going to see anything? How are you going to see past anything? How are you going to understand anything? How are you going to consider new information? Your own experience.
Yep. You have to do it like this, man. It
Your own
has to be
thoughts.
done like this. You have to think like this.
Right.
Thou art.
So we're no different than those people back when, though. Like even Heraclitus, like, he was subject to the limitations in his place and time, personal or otherwise, just like we are. It's not like we could, like America can only produce what's within its scope, right? It's not like someone's going to come along one day and invent a philosophy that's so alien that nobody can understand it, to the degree that, if it's born of the same culture or is brought from elsewhere, it's like, well, we have the tools and information out there to try and to discern and understand, values and cultures and people, like from Nietzsche's genealogical method, and all the other methods applied from the historical sense, which, we could think of Hegel, to aspects of materialism and science from Darwin, to even guys like Marx, right? Who concern themselves with, more materialist, rationalist philosophies. And a lot of it was actually, a lot of these guys, they weren't as resentful as a lot of kind of, I guess you could say, liberal thinkers, like your Rousseau's, and maybe even like, Voltaire and other guys like that.
Marx.
Yeah. But and I don't, and these are all side notes in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because again, they're concerned with the larger mechanisms. They're concerned with organizing and reorganizing, because of course everyone thinks their ideas are right and everyone thinks their ideas are best. Thus they say, do as I do, follow as I do, see if my supposition bears out, and it's like, man, that would be a hell of an experiment to run in America, like to wildly and drastically change it. And it's like, well, is it worth the destruction to prove it wrong? And I guess you could say again, because, a lot of the ideals put forth to this day, they're still just old. These are old ideals out of, Europe's history. It's like, it's dead on arrival. It's old news. It's not actually addressing the problems here and now, right? It's more hope for the future, a new government. I think of early Nietzsche, when he writes, that, any philosophy that says that, it's solved or answered the problems of existence with, political invention is a joke and pseudo philosophy, because it doesn't actually, in terms of back to the individual, to the notion that people can say life and existence and philosophy even is whatever it is that they want to argue, let's say. But it doesn't matter compared to the individual who is feeling it, from a depressed individual A over here to an aggressive and competitive individual over there, to an artist over there, right? How it varies from person to person, temperament. Yet the expression is fundamentally the same. It's an animal articulating itself. And to the degrees that self-reliance is I don't want to call it a methodology, but something close to that. Maybe more of an ethos.
I'd say it's an action,
or an evening star, like Judas Priest. Now I've seen the light. And I don't want to make it, I don't want to get religious with it, but heavy metal works. You know that song?
No, I haven't heard it.
Oh, okay. I'll send you the album later. It's great.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's
Wait, so you've never heard Killing Machine?
no.
Oh, it's so good. Okay.
No, I haven't heard it. I think, I mean, it's kind of a series of actions that you take, really. Because I mean, you know, you could say it's a whole change of your whole personality, right? A complete, you know.
Yeah, physiological change over time. You know, the you from 5 to 7 to 9 to 10 to like, you know, to say that's the same you, or to but to yet to at the same time, you know, to understand your historical sense and where you actually fit into it. You know, if you couldn't explain that to me, that actually tells me where you're at.
Well, for lack of a better word, let's call it lifestyle. Let's call it a lifestyle.
I mean, to a certain degree,
Self-Reliance.
I could say we're right, and to a certain degree, I'll say we're unreliable narrators. You know what I mean? Like we can only, you know, trusted to a point, but we also like I said, there's certain things you can't lie about, and you can't hide, and you can't get away from.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what, back to your question earlier, where we wound up. This is what bears out over time. This is what's born over time. It's a question of what's being produced. Yes. You know, okay. So if you're lying to people and people are lying to you, my question actually is, I'm pausing just for a second, so it's not intentional and unintentional rhyme. You know, who is actually manipulating who? No, who's controlling who? Who's manipulating who? It's like on one hand you have like who's the victim, who's under whose thumb, who's exerting force over who. You know, you mentioned that with the advent of civilization came the need to lie, and you know, we've become, because of our civility, it's necessitated a very passive aggressive kind of civility. You know what I mean? It's like behind it, you know, it's very thin, it's very shallow. It's like, you know, there's a lot of hostility or indifference behind it. You know, and the fact that there's so many people makes the diffusion of responsibility easy. And we've discussed all this before, so we don't need to get into it now.
Yeah.
But
so
even just like Heraclitus' time, there's still no manual. There's still no guarantee.
Yeah.
Like in the context of wisdom and truth, you know, never mind, you know, you could question, why would anyone seek it, especially if it's harmful? And what do you even do with it?
Yeah. You're not going to do any better navigating through the labyrinth with a torch.
Right. Well, I mean, the arbitrary measuring sticks just don't mean much.
Yeah.
You know, like you'll hear people say things like, oh, well, someone has to have read this, or someone has to explain this, or someone has to explain that. And, you know, otherwise they don't get it. And it's like, no. That's not actually how this works, you know, because again, tell that to Heraclitus, tell that to Nietzsche, tell that to the Buddha, you know, plenty of them got to, you know, give a certain to I guess, you know, paint a certain artistic vision that it still holds true in its profundity and magnitude to this day. You know, it's going to be, you know, it's hard to say. It's hard to imagine a humanity where what they had to say goes back to even what I said about Emerson of if we just discovered him yesterday, people found out he existed yesterday, it wouldn't change the nature of what he wrote and when he wrote it and what it says about us and what it says about him.
So I told you that I went and saw that new James Bond movie today, right? And while I was watching the movie, I was thinking, man, all the movies these days, it's just freaking remakes and reboots. But then I was thinking to myself, wait a minute. We've been making remakes and reboots of the same old stories for thousands of years.
Yeah, well, it's necessary. You know, we have to glorify it anew. You know, we got to keep coming up with novelty.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to find new ways to express and articulate ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And well, we want to hear the same stories, right? Because we like those stories.
Right. Well, it's yeah, and it's comfortable and it's familiar, you know, and then you know, and it's important to understand. But you know, again, back to the belief of like if it's only this, or if it has to be this, you know, it's limitation, it's repetition, you know, whether it's self-hoisted or encouraged by others, you know, it's not necessarily call it maybe it's a matter of serving its purpose. in terms of human, not just necessity, but happenstance to necessity and back again. It's too much to explain right now. This is where I think you bring up the example of the camel, the lion, and the child.
Yeah, so the camel and the reliant, they seek X, Y, and Z. They seek the Bible. They seek a straight line. They seek rank and order. Whereas
and they're looking for their oasis for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The child doesn't need that. The child doesn't need the light from the torch to navigate through the labyrinth because they know it's pointless. Right.
Well, he's the next generation, right? The new creator.
Yep. And sometimes the light can even confuse you, right? Because when you can see like clearly straight ahead, like all these different walls, all these twists and turns might all start to kind of blur together.
Right. Well, I mean, in assuming you even, that you think you understand what you're even looking at, because it's always a profound moment, when that bottom drops out and, people realize, oh, it's not, or it wasn't what I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I guess, when sometimes that freedom or that disillusionment actually brings on a certain catatonia, it's like that's, like if I think of a certain aspect of modern depression and nihilism and things like that, that's what comes to mind. But in terms of, stepping back again, the bigger picture, I think, Emerson's right when he says there's no more or less greater men in existence now as any other time in history. His line of everyone speaks of improvement, but no one actually improves. This is our herd nature. To have, it has us trying to be top of the heap, the marketing and the advertising too, the whole nature of the social game, the demand for the attention span, but at the end of the day, there's no improving the group or the mob because it's blind. It's like Our Lady Justice, they share a lot in common. It's not just the blindness, but the terrible force and the power of the conformity behind it. Where that primal myth, that rationale, that human psychodrama and modern delusions are baked together and codified, into a fundamentally what's inevitably an indigestible ideal, because you see inevitably people choke on it, and we're talking about whether it's just people over time to revolutions, whether there's violent and bloody or passive aggressive, the mob insists it's improved and improving, but it's always passing the buck. And we've discussed this before, the diffusion of responsibility. And in terms of people having, so much information at their disposal, and they see all this horror and damage and destruction in front of them and the injustice of the world, right? And it's available 24/7. It's like, I guess everyone's, turned into a concern troll, and everyone has their purpose for getting into the fight, right? Or getting into the game.
Yeah.
But it looks to me like, and then a lot of people are going mad from the revelations, but as it stands, it's like the same people, the same good bean counters who voted for tyranny, it's always in the name of public health. It's always in the name of the greater good, and I think of Nietzsche saying the arrival of the good is always the beginning of the end, or is it just a sign of the end or the end? I don't signaling the end. I don't know. It's something pretty straightforward like that. And then the bean counter who invents the buttons, not someone who pushes the button, who installs it, who funded it, no one actually improves. They've been asleep ever since. It was Gurdjieff echoing men like Heraclitus or Empedocles or Emerson or Nietzsche, when he says men are born asleep, they build societies asleep, they write laws asleep, and they die asleep. And I think of this. Okay, so let me, I like thinking in terms of, our naturalistic analogs, because that is us. Like there's no separation. So look at how it manifests in, let's say, zebras, right? Like the herd doesn't necessarily work together, but they do hide between, behind, and amongst one another. It's kind of an organized chaos, right? But what's really going on, right? They didn't think it out. This is what panned out. This was the roll of the dice, right? This was chance. Imagine a zebra trying to chain the wheel of chance.
Yeah.
Like a zebra's like, I'm going to strike out on my own. It's like, oh, bad idea, buddy. You stick alone, you stick out like a sore thumb. The predators actually can't be confused by your stripes when you're alone. So some
Yes.
animals, and this actually gets into a problem with self-reliance. It's actually not a problem with self-reliance. It's a problem of we could say a fundamental like flaw of perception period, or just say an earlier error in reasoning and logic. But we'll get to that shortly.
Yeah, you're talking about that diffusion of responsibility, right?
No, not just that. Let's see. It's more like the crux of the matter is that. Let's see. I wrote it out somewhere down below. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's not that, because you can hear people say it that, liberalism has failed or self-reliance has failed, or, these things have failed. Various institutions and ideas and ideals have failed. It's like, well, ideals are only ever as good as the people who try to live up to them. And again, if it's a herd zebra, what's the ideal here? Yeah. It's like, well, the issue of self-reliance is the issue with everything else to the degrees it's a myth. The difference is with guys like Nietzsche and Emerson is they meant it. And they could express to you why, and they could explain their logical deduction. And it's actually quite, it's actually impeccable, really, because it wasn't just, it's not the systematic, it's not the let me prove to you, because that whole dire need is, and even protesting itself, I suppose, right? When we protest too much, these can be suspicious impulses, right? Like, oh, well, what's he really saying? And why couldn't he have said it, more directly? And you can question all sorts of, aspects to anyone in their approach, but it should be clear that self-reliance is not the norm, it's the exception.
Yeah.
It's the irony of large masses of conformists in the land of the free and the home of the brave, taking sides, when you got governments, corporations, whether we like them or not, utilizing them, taking part in them, large conformist institutional beliefs and systems. And, it's like all of these elements have a coercive thing in their nature, because that is the I guess you could say if using Emerson's metaphor, if society is a wave, then there's a question of, I guess going along with the flow, right?
Yeah.
Right. But it's actually not that's not man's nature. We are conformists in nature.
Yes.
We are there, we are there. We're a herd animal too.
Social animals, yeah.
And back to the notion of having two options, team red or blue, donkey or elephant, both full of shit, both shitting all over, America and Americans for years now.
Yeah.
That's not a choice. It's coercion, or the illusion of choice.
Yes.
And it's, and I don't mean it again. And it's not because in this, the oppressor dynamic, again, it's not a matter of like, I feel like, I'm identifying with the slave and I want to feel better about it, or I need to fight it. It's that, again, there are many forces beyond our control, in and within all these things. And it's like, well, if we took that attitude and that was our philosophy to life, it's like, of necessity, you would just burn yourself up with so much friction. Right. Again, it's like if resources are allocated elsewhere, and this is reflected in our biology, let's say, right? Like when you're stressed out, your body immediately starts moving around, like your digestive system almost immediately, fight or flight, it shuts down practically, right? Like all these things take place to, like, it's in our very nature and makeup to behave this way. And the way our minds work is no different. Like, it's like if you formerly believed X and you devoted your life to that, you found out that was wrong, you started studying or learning something else. It's like, yeah, you could have, somewhere in there, you were faced with the choice of, you could have stuck with the losing bet, right? Or the lie, or whatever it is that you found out wasn't true. You could have stuck with that. But then you saw the cost of, like, okay, maybe you didn't see the cost, because that's the problem with choices, or the illusion of choices, is that when you make a choice, you don't even necessarily realize you're making a choice, and you don't recognize what the long or short-term implications will be, what the cost will be. Even as a kid, like 10, 12, 20, 15, 20 years old, right? Like, you're still making choices, and you might not necessarily see what the consequences are for years down the line.
Yes. Yeah, every choice you make, there is a consequence,
right, whether we
line,
see it
right?
or not. Yeah, whether we understand it or not.
But we can go beyond kind of this whole cause and effect situation, right? Because
right. Well, this is the whole old world dynamics. Again, all the old, like this is cave age stuff. This is cave age physiology, right? You know, I think of Nietzsche giving us a better way to look at it and a better methodology when he says, you know, it's only in an aesthetic phenomenon that existence in the world are eternally justified.
Yeah.
You know, that they're not understanding that our art, our politics, our religion, you know, it's centered in sharing an acceptable and beneficial vision, you know, for the individual and for the whole. Conformity concerns itself with the whole. You know, it's like a collective patchwork vision, whereas self-reliance is its antipode. You know, it's the turning of oneself and one's life into, you know, your own art. You know, it's analogous to the artist, but it didn't necessarily mean an artist is self-reliant.
Yeah.
You know, one lacks strength and power to the point of needing others as a crutch, whether it's foreign or domestic religion, belief systems, you know, faith, input. You know, I guess you could say we need a certain stimulus to work through our own methodology and to come up with our own methodology, right? To ask our own questions, and more importantly, to answer our own questions. You know, and then there's the question of, okay, well, how do you even test your hypothesis, right? You know, and that's the necessity of a science, a joyous science in particular. And then after the fact, I guess, if you're kind of over it, then it's like, okay, well, now you've returned to the childlike state because, you know, you don't actually have to concern yourself with that iron necessity. You know, you can laugh at people who are swallowing scorpions now because you don't feel that way anymore. You know, you're not chasing down that, at least not that sublimation, at least not that repression. You know, you're not beholden to that dream anymore, right? Someone else might, you know, other people are, but you're not.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the thing with because, you know, if you are this sort of like Jesus figure, Buddha figure, and you're saying all these things, you might change your mind on them later. And then all these people are still, you know, writing all these notes down. They're like, but you said this, you said that. You're like,
oh yeah, it's inevitable.
Like,
people stick around long enough, they're going to contradict themselves. It's just, it happens.
Well, that's like my problem when people are, you know, they'll say like, oh, the president lied about this, president lied about that, you know, Trump lied about this, Obama lied about this.
Well, remember Emerson.
And then I'm just thinking, well, did you ever consider maybe they just changed their mind? Crackhead.
Well, Emerson's right. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
so you say somewhere down here in the notes, you're like, let's see. All right. Generally, people are given two options, if that, but two options is not a choice; it's coercion. Right. So like when you
right, but because it feels good, it's part of the story. Yeah. It at least it feels good. It's like better than, you know, it's like, why? Because it has to be that way. Well, that answer is not good enough. Just like I don't know isn't good enough. And there's a whole problem. You know, when you start asking questions and start unraveling threads, it's like, well, follow that through, see where it goes. You know, in its most extreme, you go like, oh, the self isn't even real. You know, it's like, did the Buddha have to go that far? No, he was kind of an asshole. But, you know, Nietzsche came to the same conclusion, you know, 2,500 years later, and he expressed a similar sentiment. And it was just, and it really is out of the Western canon. You're pretty far removed to, by most means, in terms of our philosophy and our, like, the physiology that created in our people over time. You know, that what I think of as a culturally speaking, a philosophical timeline. You know, the shared culture of a people as it grows and changes over time, you know, whether it matures and bears fruit or just decays mainly, or, you know, like us, we just kind of go in circles over here. Time is a flat circle for us. Yeah, that's
let's read this little thing you got from the Alcoholics, Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, it's pretty good, huh? Check it out. Go for it.
Take a look at the results normal people are getting from self-sufficiency. Everywhere we see people filled with anger and fear, society breaking up into warring fragments. Each fragment says to the other, we are right and you're wrong. Every such pressure group, if it is strong enough, self-righteously imposes its will upon the rest. And everywhere, the same thing is being done on an individual basis. The sum of all this mighty effort is less peace and less brotherhood than before. The philosophy of self-sufficiency is not paying off. Plainly enough, it is a bone-crushing juggernaut whose final achievement is ruin.
Yeah, and
Wow.
remember, it's coming from alcoholics, so I guess take it with a grain of salt. And they classify themselves as distinct by saying, look at the normal people. So
Yeah.
you got to take these considerations. But at the same time, it's it's one interpretation. I've heard like modern, everyone from conservatives, the liberals, the neoconservative, neoliberals, say, liberalism has failed. This self-sufficiency has failed, self-reliance has failed, things, all those things. But I think they have it backwards. By definition, if it's warring factions under the guise of some semblance of civility or progressivism, politics, war by other means, the same old stories, really, right? This is what I said earlier of like, we actually don't have any new ideas, right? You think in thousands of years we'd come up with some new, bigger organizing principles. It's actually very hard to do, it turns out.
Same old stories, remakes and reboots, right?
But again, if it's warring factions, by definition, it isn't self-reliance. It's where it's herd think, it's group think, it's the same old conformity. And you see this in the same sentiment from, all the tiredness and the decadence and the disappointment, the resentment and the confusion that comes out of modern liberalism, in modern conservatism too. You would think disillusionment would make people happy, but instead it often destroys their conception of themselves in the world. They'd rather cling to the fiction, than be honest. And, it's like you told me before, modern conservatism is like you said, it's, I think, something like nothing more than the liberalism of the past. And, and I and to my mind, it's like, oh, that's perfect. It's like they're trying to catch for years now, they've been trying to catch everything that progressives have been throwing away. And, making them the de facto liberals.
Yeah.
Yet, their issue all along was that it's like, well, they didn't see where the attacks were coming from. They didn't see where the changes were coming from, and they didn't know how to deal with it. And part of that is because they don't understand their own value systems, let alone other value systems.
It's like, it's like the liberal.
Like, we're not actually conscious of these things. People actually because we didn't evolve to be conscious of these things. The kind of bedrock that undergirds our both our metaphorical structures in our minds, as well as the actual physical structures before us, and the symbology therein, because it's endless, right? We got statues and paintings and pictures and art just covering the earth, and to the degrees that satellites circling the earth, that's another form of expression, and that's communication.
And so I wanted to say that like the liberals kind of like in their house, they're like throwing shit away. They're like throwing stuff behind their back. And then the conservatives like, wait, dude, you're throwing this away? You're throwing that? No, dude, you can't throw all that shit away. We got to keep that shit. What are you doing?
Yeah. Because, it's a question of if you are throwing, it's like you actually have to question then, okay, given our repressive nature, what's changing here? What are the old anchors? What are the new ones? What are the new, what's the old sublimation? What's the new one, right? It's the old story. What's the new one?
Yep. And then the liberals like, well, we gotta get new shit. It's for your own good. Well, and then the conservatives like, well, we gotta keep the old shit. We gotta keep this trash. It's for your own good, right?
Right. And you can almost see it like it's like a primordial. It's like Dionysus gone drunk with power, like going overboard. And like Apollo's like, no, like don't throw out my lyre, right? Like don't throw out, like you're throwing away. You like at this point you're gonna throw away your own wine cup, Dionysus, right? Like rein it in.
Yeah.
Because I would say it's I would say that it's part of a lack of self-reliance. It's not just having a dysfunctional relationship with art. If you remember specifically, if you remember Bukowski's poem we read, The Genius of the Crowd, where he says, if not understanding art, not being able to understand art, the genius of the crowd is that not being able to create it themselves, they'll consider their failures as creators as failures of the world and of you, and then their level, and their hatred will be perfect, and it's perfectly average, it's perfectly mediocre. That's the spookiest thing about it, right? If we're talking about the ugly truth, one of the spookiest things about it is that the mediocre and the average is the most common, and what that spells out.
What does that spell out?
Just eternal recurrence, the return to the mean. It's like, what is the norm? Is it peace or is it warfare? It's like, no, it's a constant evolutionary arms race. And that's the whole thing about the docility and domestication forces of Christianity through both, old school Catholicism to the modern day and secular politics, from European liberalism to American liberalism, that expression, has been to resent and fear and mistrust power, and to hate it, and yet to yearn for it, but only be allowed to do it in a very sublimated and passive aggressive way. The channeling, the way the church channeled people's impulses and thoughts and feelings, is no different than how the modern political and marketing systems work.
Yeah.
Like that larger mass force, the nature of a mass force, you could say, that hasn't changed. That is an organizing fact of our existence that's still here. And with certain technologies, we risk going down like, some black hole upon which, like, you can imagine a scenario in which we might not return, at least not in any recognizable way, in terms of, if we are throwing things away, we actually don't know. We aren't guaranteed that things are going to work out the way we want it, whether we think they will or not. But back to the point, bringing up this notion that, like, self-reliance has failed, or, self-sufficiency fails. And it's like, no, it's doing just well. It's like, because if, like, we wind up inventing new terms in boogeyman. I could think of, like, for like the term neoliberalism, which is, like, in political terms, is a propaganda term, but it's, again, mostly a grease trap to sublimate the failures of liberalism. So neoliberalism becomes a scapegoat. It's the boogeyman, the thing standing in the way, the target of the evil eye. Self-reliance has failed. No, self-reliance and those who self-rely are doing fine. The conformist independents are the ones who are upset now because they're perpetually upset. Yeah. That's the nature of the average. Human beings have been, they've been expressing their perpetual upset for millennia now. Yeah. And I think in terms of great thinkers, it's like, well, the difference in them and the average is that they articulate whole new ways of going, like, welcome to my nightmare. That's actually one of the most common sentiments. I think it's like Nietzsche in comparison is hilarious. Both the way he points at what is a nightmare, yet also is able to retain his humor and his sense of self therein.
Yeah, like, welcome to the club, welcome to my world,
Yeah, and like I said, he welcomes you to understand it.
Yeah. And well, so like, the thing is, when people say, oh, like, self-sufficiency failed, well, those people weren't being self-sufficient, right?
Or it could be, obviously it could be more complicated than that, but I'd say it's that it's not that, any of these things fail. It's that it's kind of been a myth anyway. The men who come into consciousness here have only ever had so many ways of expressing or relating their thoughts, articulating themselves. Many such men, like I've mentioned, they wake up, they see how bad it is. And apparently it's so bad, they must learn new ways of articulating and impressing, new ways of expressing and mapping it out to show you just what the problem is.
Yeah.
Right. Because, everyone else is going la-di-da, like, we got these things figured out. And someone else is like, whoa, wait, this isn't the full amount. You guys haven't done the measurements. You haven't, checked the scales. What are we actually dealing in here? Then the difference again between myth and, say, Emerson or a Nietzsche is that they embodied it and they backed it up, and they showed you their work. And it's, again, there's certain things that just can't be lied about. And I think about the work they did, and it's like, if you look in the New Testament, I think Christ has a few thousand words in total, his parables, his philosophy, his religion, and you compare that to the writing of just like the essay Self-Reliance alone is maybe more, I want to say more than that. Or
it is
the book Genealogy of Morals, thousands and thousands of words, many pages, or, and then even the work, let's say, Socrates did in his time, it's like all the work everyone's had to do since then to try and discern, what's actually there.
Yeah. Well, to give some of these people some credit, they weren't really, like, the thinkers weren't really writing themselves a whole lot back then. It was mainly like scribes that would write for them.
Right. Like, and it was also, and again, and they were like, I think we mentioned before, right, that a lot of times, individualist thinkers or people in general, it's like, yes, sometimes they do exist more in a relationship of what's closer to Stockholm syndrome or a hostage, like even like Copernicus, right? Or, you know, and in a lot of places to this day, it's like, yeah, that system is still in place. You have scribes and middlemen who are usually just actually informants or, you know, representatives for another power, making sure that this potentially dangerous person, you know, depending on what their craft is, you know, doesn't speak out too much or do something or say something, you know, or upset people. Or upset the natural, the order as it's been established. So, and I guess this is where we do get to a point where, you know, liberalism does fall down flat. You know, the former ideals towards a more unified and privileged, like, you know, working class proletariat to usher in the forward to the next step in our evolution, like a great society, you know, trying to save all the poor and stupid and weak, you know, all these things that, you know, the great utilitarian project, the great Christian project, the great civilizing project, you know, I'm thinking Manifest Destiny, the original one, and this current 2.0 that's kind of going on right now. And when I say Manifest Destiny, I just mean like, this is our vision and we're dragging you along with it, whether you agree or not. Like that's what I think of when I think of like kind of the modern pushy American liberal. You know,
the biggest problem is that
I mean, the ideals have had time to prove that they don't work, is what I mean. Is like over time it's failed. You know, over time, you know, the systems haven't borne out for the way our the advancements or circular movements of our technological advanced society.
Well, it's not just like their beliefs, right? It's not just like, oh yeah, I believe this should happen because of this. It's that they push it onto other people. They think you should believe this too, you know.
Right.
You have to believe this, you know, thou art.
Oh, right. That's the new injunction. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, to bring back that 1984.
Right. I mean, we've had years,
right. So.
Yeah, and we've had years of just improving people along these lines. You know, more, better. Because Nietzsche's got a lot to say about the criticism of how the old Europeans used to do it, and by contrast, how Americans do it. You know, now as never before. You know, that we figured out how to generate wealth and how to create more of it and more, bigger, better, right? Like, but it's just kind of blindly and dumbly just doing that, you know, to ad infinitum, right? Ad nauseum, you know, until it's just kind of like, you know, it actually, you know, there's actually not a plan or a vision, and it hasn't taken us to those suppositions that this was going to be the advanced society, or this is going to be the evolved society. It doesn't mean people haven't learned something. It doesn't mean we haven't, discerned new science and new understanding.
Yeah, but at one point people want to stop learning, right?
Well, I mean, but that's all. I mean, that stuff is contingent upon the rest, because if the rest is too unstable, then, you know, stuff like science becomes a luxury. You know,
in high school, in Spanish class, I once told this girl that I didn't believe in God, right? And she told me, "What? You don't believe in God? Well, then, how could you not believe in God? Your life must be meaningless. Life would be meaningless without God." And I was like, no. Like, what do you mean? Like,
yes. Sometimes
why would life be meaningless without God? What are you talking about? Like, how could why would God make life any more meaningful or meaningless if there was a God? That's like the question that I want to know, because it would still be just as worthless as however you make it. So,
what do you mean?
What
do you mean, just as worthless however you make it?
So,
you mean if that's your reasoning, or that's your logic?
With or without God, life can still be completely meaningless. So
sure. Well, I mean, it's not going to save you. It's not going to stop any. It's not going to change anything. I guess, you know, again, I think again, back to our old methodologies. It seemed to me it naturally evolved to kind of to sublimate that psychodrama of the evolution of what we came to call a self in the first place. You know, like, it had that role in there, and its effect is a physiological one. It's called actually maybe it's cause and effect. I guess you could say it's physiological to the degree that, as far as we can tell, you know, external stimuli motivated internal machinations or mutations, right? Whatever that interplay is, right? We're looking at the larger picture of the science, not necessarily concerning ourselves with, we need to prove or make explicitly clear. It's just understanding these forces at work, right?
Yeah.
And in animals, and in our biology.
The thing is, people want a God. They want some ideal to be enslaved
I
by.
think life is otherwise, again, they need the psychodrama. Life is otherwise too boring. And again, it's like, okay, so why? I think, a question like the heaviest burden, that question only matters in the context of the death of God, right? It only matters because the notion is, if you have no roots, no anchor, no sublimation that's good enough for you now, what point and purpose is your life? This goes back to like, this is what you couldn't understand, I guess, with that, when that chick asked you that question, it was foreign to you because your mind was so wholly rooted in this other mindset where God's not even a question, or an afterthought. And it's like, I guess, I like, thankfully Nietzsche didn't spend his time, making those arguments and doing that, because I think it would have been a waste of his time, right? Like he had more important things. That's just the bare bones beginning,
Yeah.
Like because the loss or death of something else, it's like, well, okay, then what rushes in to fill the void, because nature does in fact abhor a vacuum, right? Like nowhere in nature do you find vacuum.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, not to the degree that it's filled and regulated by other forces. I guess actually you could say all of space is a vacuum, and that's a very human perspective to say nature abhors a vacuum. It looks like nature is all vacuum, except where pressurized systems can exist within the face of it, at least as far as we can observe to a point.
Well, everything's
don't start asking about black holes and shit.
Stuff, right? There's like
it seems that way. Energy, the transformation of energy.
Yeah.
Like, is that it seems that energy's nature to, if we boil down Nietzsche in the most simplistic or elemental terms we can, it's like, energy coalesces to be expelled.
Yes.
Force accumulates, force explodes.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just what like all energy is like this will to continue consuming, this will to continue reacting, this will to continue going, right?
Right.
That's all it does. It just keeps transforming and articulating itself wherever it can, however it can, right? And that's kind of what we are as living organisms. We're this coalition, this conglomerate of forces and energy, which are able to see and hear and touch and scream and fucking love. And you see think.
You see that conglomeration abhors death, right? It's definitely the mortal fear that drives us crazy and makes us really stupid.
Yes.
It's often in that people find their death, right? Through their excessive fear, through their worries, through their stress.
Like, oh God, one day I'm gonna stop consuming. Like, fuck. Like I'm gonna stop being this conglomerate.
Right. And in the light of all this talk, it's easy to think like, oh, these are depressing ideas or topics, but and it is that dreariness. It is that awareness that does have like modern liberalism and modern, Western thought and philosophy, like sagging. And, there's a lot of you could say hate and nihilism to go around, and to me, that's like, that stuff is as Christian as ever. Despite the distinctions between not just, you could say, political parties and religion, but also the way they've affected each other and how the political parties differ, because, a conservative is not the same as a right-wing extremist, is not the same as any number of other political propaganda terms, is still not the same as a socialist, a communist, or whatever, because it's like, okay, pick your poison, and, this is your artistic vision, but to the degrees that collectivists are trying to share a vision, it's like, well, that's never going to line up, because if everyone says, if everyone's got a different piece of the puzzle, good luck putting that together, when there's millions of you. Like, it only exists as an artistic vision, as a project upon which to work. It's like the moment you actually achieve it, that would be a problem, but also, and it's not that utilitarian society is wrong. It's that it's understanding that it's nothing to be excited about, because it actually speaks to our failures. When I think of failures, I think of like the need of science, like psychology itself, the dark star of decay and decadence that birthed it. Why did we even have to begin to consider these things at all? Even the dissection of our mythologies over time. Why did we have to do that? It's like, because we didn't understand, and we wanted to understand, and then we understood, and then there was almost too much to bear.
Yeah.
And you see some people do lose their minds. It's, for some people, it really is. Modern life is a gear grinding, mentally ill process. Because I'll say it's not just, like I said, it's not just a dysfunctional relationship with art whether they're conservative, which I guess we boiled it down to elemental forces, you could say temperament, conservative or liberal. One's more Dionysian, one's more Apollonian.
Yeah.
Um,
So you say down here somewhere, you're saying that you don't have to understand how a tool works to understand how to use it, or
yes, you can use a drill without knowing how to build one, right? You can use there's a lot of things you can do without knowing, and I think it's an angle to think about, just how we operate in the world.
Yeah.
Lots of people use and abuse tools.
Right. It's specialized. People get a hammer and they start thinking everything's a
oh, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Get a gun, everything becomes a target, or whatever.
Right.
Whatever it is. I get a phone, everyone becomes my friend somehow.
Right.
Or my enemy. Or my enemy.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, that's kind of how it is. We have a brain, and we all of a sudden we think we can think about anything, and that we know everything about it, about anything, because we have a brain. And that's kind of where it all starts, right?
Oh, right. Human arrogance. I mean, there is something to a will to stupidity. Again, you can think of any great thinker, not a scholar, not an intellectual, great thinkers, right? That what they had to do to hit escape velocity from whatever the constraints were of their place in time, for a lot of people who suffered a lot over time, whether it was the church or some other, again, always fundamentally conformist forces, virtues, and values, because that's what we are. Again, self-reliance, it's, if people are disappointed, it's like, well, because sorry, you believe, again, it's a bit like Santa Claus. It's like, no, some men are that strong, and others, it's like, well, it looks like they're going to suffer.
Yeah.
Right. There's always been the suffering masses. That's always been, you could say, one of many problems of existence. In the worst case for a bad thing for a nation to have is a large mass of suffering people, especially a large mass of angry suffering people.
Yeah.
People seek their revenge for good reason.
But the people in power, they want large masses of angry, suffering people. Not only that, they want them to be angry at each other, right?
What's like dealing with 2-year-olds? It's like dealing with 2-year-olds. They're for how cranky they are, they're easy to control. They're just 2-year-olds. It's and to the degrees that they have those mood swings, it's like, okay, well, look, they're like any other animal, they have you could say, a optimal physiology or homeostasis, and sometimes that gets out of whack, and then it's kind of easy. You can get it back into the line with, not saying treat your children like little robots. I'm saying, it's just understanding human, the way we kind of operate. Yeah. So but I mean, it's, and, you could say that's a beneficial thing, that you don't have to understand how it works. But then if you don't understand how it works, it also tells me that something's missing, and then someone else who doesn't see that lack would say, why doesn't it matter?
Yeah. And
it's like, oh, no. Every last trivial detail here matters. Like we're leaving no stone left unturned.
Yep. Yeah. And well, it's like you say, it's or like it's like we've been saying, that children and slaves, they get stuck on these absolutes, they get stuck on these ideologies, they get enslaved, and it's not just that they get enslaved, like they're forced into slavery, but they want to be enslaved. They want to have.
Well, it's a good guideline.
Yeah.
Right. And look, and honesty is, we don't know any other, even if you gave your kid, we give our kids moral educations rooted in religion or otherwise, just because we have no one actually has a better way to kind of bring them in line with societal ideals. Yeah. They're right. It's like, usually you learn it in school. And then often, historically speaking, it used to be more common, that it was all very religious, much more religious, for most of history.
Yeah.
Only recently have things become very secularized and liberalized, and for most of time and space, as far as human existence is concerned, very few people had that privilege and that power of being an authority figure, and everyone else had to subjugate. That was the psychodrama, is the priest was the gatekeeper, and I guess that's the long held Apollonian understanding, is that you can't just give it to the dogs, like it's gonna go to shit, right? And that's why people have gate kept for a long time. but then again, too much rigidity within that artistic vision of that society. Again, you see that's another way. It's a very, I guess the human ecosystem is, I think, even though we've survived thus far, it's like in terms of optimal, what we tend to view, I guess you could say, as the human optimal, it's like it's actually very delicate. It's easily disrupted. It's easy to take for granted.
Yeah. I mean, it's all easy to take for granted, really. Everything. Just existing is easy to take for granted. And I think that's part of the suffering. Like, I think in a large part, people feel entitled to exist. People feel entitled to live. People feel entitled to survive. They feel
right. No, it makes
they
sense.
Should survive. They should live.
Yeah, it's like I think that's a fundamental, at least in its most bare bones incarnation. It's a healthy impulse, right? This forever, me forevermore. Yeah. Right? Like it's actually offensive, right? The thought of not existing. Most people are horrified by it, traumatized by it even, or, it's so frightening that they can barely bring it into consciousness.
Yeah. But so, like, speaking of being like entitled to something, like speaking of having privilege, let's talk about conformity, right? Let's talk about the privilege of conformity.
Right. There's no greater privilege.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, so you're part of the majority of thought and being, and you agree with the majority, and the majority generally agree and believe as you. And it's like, you could question, is this happenstance? In which case you would say, well, that's convenient. That your philosophy, your ethics, your morality, and the capital T truth, let's say, whether, obviously this is an absurd example, but if all those things happen to line up and they're all the same thing, and it happens to be the good thing or the right thing, the just thing, and the greater good thing, and it's not biased, and it's objective truth, and there's few or little to no errors or follies and no lies. It's like you've discovered the natural law of the universe. It's as if you've discovered the thing in and of itself. It's as if you've invented a new God. You figured everything out, and this is conformity, and then I could ask further, it costs you little and gives you most everything. Because I'm not going to say it costs you nothing, because it actually does cost. It's just a question again, do people realize the cost? And, I guess if they're willing to pay the price, doesn't matter whether they understand the cost. It's like you pay the price regardless. That's actually in the manual. If a manual to life existed, that would or should be in there, right? That you'll pay the cost regardless if you're aware of the price.
Well, they'll ask you, Mynaa, hey, what are you doing? So what should we do? What should we do? And then you'd be like, looks like everyone's doing that, right? So let's do that.
Right. Well, low risk, low reward.
It's easy, and especially
simple,
like
easy.
Social, like say if you're dancing, like you're in a group dance, and you're like, just do what everyone else is doing, right? And that's what everyone's doing these days. They're in a dance, there's these people doing the tango, there's these people doing the tarantula, right? So
right. It's safe, and again within conformity, you find your validation, you find your recognition, you find the approval of others, and it's at the cost of, it's at the price of the creation of your persona, that both like guys like Young and Gurdjieff and a few other more heavy duty thinkers, or I tend to think of as greater thinkers at the very least. When they say the persona is just a complete fabrication, they like, it's just this, it's back to the question of who's manipulating who. It's like, well, this is just this, it's a part of you that's a liar. It's a part of you that's a coward. It's a manifestation of you that is lesser than you because you actually created it to appease the people around you. We don't think about civility and politeness in terms like this. And I guess you could in certain circumstances it could seem really gross or even psychotic, but you understand what I'm saying, yes?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Right. And again, like, right. If you got the capital T truth and no errors or folly there, it's like, this is the privilege of conformity. It's the utmost privilege that's ever been, because that as social animals, that's front and center in our very being, our whole, like, the level of our neuroticism is mitigated by that, right? Like our well-being, our stress levels are mitigated by that. And if you live, if in your mind and in your life you feel and live and act as if a slave, or as if a victim of a torture chamber of this earth, it takes its toll physiologically. And I think it's the body's, like what was generated over time in the feedback loop with the environment. It's like, well, our study, like our best like I think our best primatologists are better and more important than any of our psychologists in human history. And I mean that.
Yeah.
For understanding of how stress works in social animals, how this affects us more than anything we consciously or unconsciously say.
Well, it's also because when you're a primatologist, you're stepping out of like looking at context. You're not looking at like all the little social paradigms or all the beliefs that you yourself are caught on. You're just looking at
communication amongst social animals is huge.
Yeah.
Like with us, it's not just with them too, it's verbal and it's nonverbal.
Yeah.
And then you throw in another element, and with us, it's also the non-existent, aka the lie or the fiction.
Yeah.
So it's like we add a level of abstraction, like we invented stuff that's just not there. Yeah. Like in our communication, it's like that's pretty far out. Like it doesn't feel that way that it's not there, but it isn't,
Yeah, because
it's quite the art that our physiology evolved in step with that art of, let's say, like a god and a religion, and it can make you feel really high and it can make you feel really low. All the feelings and emotions associated with the religious feeling and the religious impulse.
Yeah. Well, it's like even because like at the end of the day, all our mythology, like all words, all sentences, all paragraphs, like everything, all stories are all just made up, right? They're just kind of these fictitious things. I mean, they're just sounds.
Well, yeah, or a way to spend your time.
Your brain.
Or a way to spend your time. What else are you going to do here? A lot of it's a question of is one's work, because again, one's work is often a sublimation of that power or a proxy to power, depending on what you're doing and why.
Yeah.
And then you could question, back to the notion of, I'm going to rewind a minute. We're talking about, the notion that self-reliance failed, and it's like, well, it's kind of it's the mythos, and reality is we're herd creatures.
Yeah.
And, in terms of how this expresses over time, it's fundamental textbook, even it's textbook unconsciousness. It's yet the thing is, if I ask the question, who's manipulating who? The liar or those whose demands necessitated the lie or gave birth to the lie incidentally, whichever it may have been. The reality would then be, they're helpless to each other as they are to themselves, especially if it's temperamental, right? Especially if it's inborn, more, just naturalistic than anything else, right? It's not something you can consciously change. It's not something you can just explain away in philosophy or idealizations. It's actually, it becomes in that light, we're talking about a profound limitation. One force is as helpless to prevent its collision with another, as much as the individual therein is helpless to force to the force that he is a small part of. And this is the herd animal man at work.
Yeah.
And I think to the degrees this is disrupted, it produces mental illness in us. It's a disruption of our kind of, I guess you could say, natural game.
Yeah.
A lot of the psychology of the last, a lot of the thinkers within psychology of the last 100 years kind of recognize that, that it's easily disrupted, that our minds and our societies as these kind of ecosystems, that it doesn't take much to actually destabilize them.
No, it doesn't.
Just like an immune system, or hell, even just like I think of like the human mind, like it's like you can experience, mundane human consciousness, and then I can give you like I could like put some mushrooms in your coffee, and then like let's say like I hit a heroic dose of mushrooms in your brownie, and now I just changed your mind and your physiology, and especially if you've never done it, in a way that you previously didn't know was possible or might have thought even impossible. And it's like, well, what does that say of our thoughts then? If it's so, if an invisible amount if an almost non-existent amount of a tiny substance can vastly change our minds and our bodies and how we feel about things, what's it say of any notion of like, oh, this in perpetuity, the mind is eternal, or I am permanent, or I am, whatever it is that we think we are. The stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean, this is kind of Plato's allegory of the cave, right? I mean, people can be staring at all these shadows against the wall their entire lives, and you bring them outside to see the sunshine, and holy shit, their lives are changed forever. It's like what the hell? And they can choose from then on there. Do I want to go back to the cave or keep going?
Give them some mushroom sunshine.
Yeah, but it goes further with that, and with so many other things. You can tell someone who's never been fishing in their entire lives. You say, "Hey, man, you want to go fishing today?" Right? And you bring them along. They've thrown their line, they catch a fish, and like, oh god, their whole life has changed from then on there.
Right.
It can be as simple as that.
Right, and then whether the changes, they can be lightning bolt moments, it could be slow education over time, that coupled with heartache and disillusionment seems to me to be the most productive and most, what with the process that, with the right amount of friction and challenge, will yield, fruits to the individual. Because I hope you see the how and why of self-reliance now, this, okay, I guess it's like this, again, back to the warring factions. If we aren't so readily or simply the things we say we are in this political theater, if we aren't so as polite and as civilized and as free and as wonderful as we think we are, and that we easily render ourselves sick, to ourselves and to each other, and it comes in the fact that this can come from your own family, right? That pathology finds its most common activity, like in its most common place, like in the human home, right? It's not, it actually doesn't come from with like, you have, physical illness and other illness, virus and yada, yada. But like in terms of abuse and damage is like some of the most common just happens at home, right? So it doesn't even need to be an enemy or a hostile force or an invading force. Your own people, your own family, your own culture can make you sick. And again, this is the importance of self-reliance. Someone once said, it's no measure of health to adjust yourself to a sick society. And in that case,
but also they're usually
welcome
the ones
to America.
They're also the ones that you're most likely to get sick from. And that's in like the
of course, in the
sense, right?
In the literal sense, it's great when the kind of abstract finds its kind of mirror or corollary in the physical. Like I think a lot of within the context of Nietzsche's philosophy, I think part of why he's so brilliant is that it's all there. Like as far as I can tell, it's all there, right? It maps onto biology, it maps onto psychology, the will to power and what it represents as, I guess, better than whim, right? As an abstract or a further abstracted conception and articulation of what is just, same thing it's always been, animal expression, will to power makes absolute sense.
Yeah. So what is...
And remember, weakness is the precondition for disease.
Yeah. Yeah, right? It is. Yeah, it is. And
it's also who the predators know who to target. So back to the problem with the pathological family is it's the double whammy, right? That the kid doesn't want to, or that, what happens to the kid is that he's abused. And not only does he suffer the detriments in the the short and the long-term ramifications of that, but he also might be someone else's lunch now as a result. Right, because someone else comes along and like next thing you know, well, he was a good kid. Well, how do you wind up in the Manson family? Well, his parents, they were crazy. Who knows?
Yeah, and well, it's like good kid, mad city, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're born into this world, and eventually there's all these outside forces that kind of push us this way or that, and it's up to you to stand up to those forces and be your own force, right? Be your own force of destiny.
Right. Oh, and now we're getting back to your question again, right? Here we've come full circle of, you said, what are we bearing out here? And I could tell you, the results don't lie. That, whether you fancy yourself independent and liberty-minded or not, in fact, that it's the way we are. Most people are in fact conformists and dependents.
Yeah.
And, I can ask you, when someone addresses you, demands an answer of you, do you look within or do you look to those around you? Do you follow their verbal and their nonverbal cues to appease them? And, whether it's marketing or sales or art or politics or religion, that whole consciousness of the need to lie, of the need to hide, to spin certain circuitous webs, like all these games, it's like all these social games, the need and the purpose manifest therein. It capitalizes on it, not just our self-consciousness, but our excessive self-consciousness. And this could be from simple desire to narcissism. And then you can seek relief in these things and things like religion or political activism. And, and then these very same systems also capitalize by further traumatizing and making tragic our self-consciousness. It's like the worse a preacher or a religion or a political party can make out people and our existence, like it seems like the more horrible and stupid solution people will accept, right? Like the worse I can paint existence, the better I can sell you, right? Because if I'm letting you see a reflection of you in me in this picture I'm painting, there it is. You find a reflection therein, you find a validation therein. And if you're mostly just afraid, and if your physiology is that of feeling mostly weak and afraid, maybe you find solace in me. And this is just speaking fundamentally on how, I guess you could say whether it's a cult leader or someone else, like this is what they're preying off of.
And I find solace in speaking and acting in the way that I believe that you want me to speak and act.
Right. And then I guess it's easy to take for granted now, but I'm thinking, man, what? It's actually really easy for people to get mixed up in that, because the tendency is to want to judge them. But again, if they're helpless to it themselves and to each other, it's like, man, it's like being lost. It's like a dream within a dream at that point, because it's like, okay, not only do you don't know who and what you are, but you're lost in someone else's vision, or appeasing or attaining to someone else's vision of who or what you should be. Like it becomes real blurry to me real quick. And I guess I've been a certain way so long that it's hard, I've been me for so long that it's hard to imagine otherwise, I guess is what I'm saying. But I now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah.
When people don't want to be swept up into that way,
what's manipulative
thinking, right?
Which way?
Of acting how they think others want them to act, right? It's a horrible way of going about your life.
Well, it's comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Right. I remember you shared some thoughts with me along those lines.
Yeah. Yep. It's comfortable to be that way. It's non-risky, and it's easy, and it's lazy. Most importantly, it's lazy.
Right.
It's not out of fear. It's not out of some weird need to relate to other people. It's just because you're lazy. You don't want to put in the effort to be yourself, or to be honest with yourself, or to assert yourself in a certain way.
Right. Yeah. No matter where you go, laziness, it's what do you call it? Probably our most common and our worst trait,
Yeah. So where are we?
Well, I mean, this is
it's 6:11 p.m. Pacific time. So let's kind of get into what is a liar, right? And you say
right.
It's a resentful slave, or at least it's a slave in favor of self-preservation.
Right. Well, he definitely doesn't want to be seen, right?
Yeah.
Say, if you see me and you know what I'm thinking, you're going to want to put me down, or you're going to want to hurt me, right?
Yeah.
That's a profound understanding and feeling, and it's a really messed up game to play. If you actually think about it, right? The kind of pressure that is put on people. But again, it's been in our nature a long time.
Yes.
And I guess people think they can game the social animal systems and manipulate them. But it gets hard to tell who's manipulating who. if people's behaviors elicit, like if person A and B and C, or just person A, it doesn't matter. If people's behaviors elicit and necessitate lies or half truths, never mind moral judgments for a second here. We're talking just the psychological measures here, like what is generally repression and coercion. But if someone else's actions seems to necessitate lies or half truths out of you, then would that be them manipulating you by way of your need to lie? Or say yes to appease them when you don't want to, or you can't appease them, no matter the reason, but again, who's influencing who? The liar or those being lied to? You could ask, do you see how they both created and played the game? This is the toxic relationship. At that point you go, okay, like, does someone say like time out, like we need a better game? No, it just becomes, it seems to become just, if that's the way we do business, it becomes a toxic relationship.
Yeah.
And I think of the word inflexibility in the same way Emerson uses it, in the same way Nietzsche uses it, in the context of inflexibility as a virtue in an era or age gone up its own ass, let's say, where dishonesty is most common, where marketing is common, where, we have, again, a wide pool of culture, but a shallow pool of culture. Mistake after mistake, and again, we've come full circle. The people are as absent or as drunk as ever. It's not their fault. It's just the way it's always been. This world has always been said to be on fire. It's not a new thinking. It's not even grandpa thinking. It's ancient thinking. It's ancient understanding.
Yeah.
So,
well, and people have seen many worlds be on fire, right? They've seen the collapse of civilizations over time.
And we have the data too.
And that PTSD, it like,
it's on record too.
Itself through generations upon generations.
Oh yeah, no, I think Christianity's produced a lot of mental illness. I think a lot of these systems and ways of thinking, and namely their physiological effects, meaning again, like I think we're thinking more like, or at least I am thinking more like, I know you're going along with my game here, right? They were thinking more like animals in a zoo. Again, what happens? Like these ones can manage a bit better. These are too dumb to know any better. These ones are depressed. These ones are too intelligent to be here.
Yeah.
Like put someone in a box. It's the worst thing you could do to somebody. And it's ironic that the most liberal, and that this one really is pretty far out, right? That the most liberal and concern trolling yet privileged people to ever exist on the planet, the American people, have inadvertently built the world's largest prison system. And this isn't about a moral judgment. I'm just saying it, like, if no one's ever been to jail or prison, like, you don't know, then you have no idea how bad it actually is. You have no idea that it's like that Zaf is right, that it's the worst thing you can do to a human being in terms of trying to punish them or inflict cruelty.
Yeah. Well, that's that story I told you about the fawn that got stuck in our backyard, right? It kept trying to like run itself out, but it kept hitting the fence over and over again. It kept hitting the fence, and eventually
couldn't figure out how to jump out. Oh, geez. Yeah. See, right. Exactly. Right.
It was dangling. There was blood gushing down its mouth, and it kept running into the fence again.
And that's a death sentence in the wild, right? Like an animal, a lot of like a deer, like it can't survive a lot of certain injuries, and that's when it can't survive.
Yeah. Then my dad's just yelling at me, "Greg, go open the fence! Go open the fence!" I like run over the fence. I go open it, and then finally the
you should have shot it.
Saw it again.
That would have been the merciful thing to do.
Yeah, but
most merciful in that context. No, I mean, it's fine. I'm not. You should. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's nature at work, right? It's beautiful, right? People say they love nature, right? That's majestic and intelligent. It's like, no, it's also reactive, flighty, and self-destructive.
Yeah. Well, my dad did tell me this story. He like hit a deer on his car, and then he called Fish and Game, and they're like, well,
yeah, you can keep it.
It's like, well, we're not gonna do anything about it, so it's up to you. And then my dad just like hit it, just bashed its skull open with a tire iron, just to let it go, just to let it not suffer any longer, because it was just like sitting there whining, bleeding to death. So he just couldn't take it. But
yeah, it's hard to witness,
Yeah,
or it can be, at least. So, and within these larger contexts, if you could think of all the animals being stuck in the gate together, bashing their jaws off, does the utmost reflection and meditation on your self-reliance become clearer? How could you know you yourself when formerly you were a persona playing a game? Are you aware of, I asked you before of like your own history, about your own history, because I do think it's a meditation and a riddle, even unto us, that we don't understand ourselves. And over time, we kind of come to see what we think is ourself, or we, again, whether it's a persona or a reflection of somebody or something we hope is there, who we want it to be, like the ideal self or whatever it is we're aspiring to.
Yeah.
But the real question is, again, like, what are the forces that created you? It's a question of how did you evolve? I could say conscious agents can be trusted, but they're rare. There's been like a handful in all of history. In the meantime, we've been playing these games, and nature has us locked in step because, again, if we don't have to be conscious for any of it, we can be relatively unconscious through all of it. And, for most of human history, that's just it, right? Asleep at the wheel, no different than now. We pretend to be more sophisticated and we fool ourselves, but the reality is we never evolved. Like, we didn't evolve to be separate from nature. That's a luxury of modern delusion, right? That's not primal mythos. That's modern delusion. That's our mind. That's the mind being further warped to think in weird terms or, abstractions that don't even suit or matter to us fundamentally.
Because we are nature.
Yeah, we're animals playing our animal games, namely survival and its will to power.
Yeah. And it's always going to be that way.
Yes.
As long as we have physical bodies, as long as we still eat and shit and sleep, we're still going to be animals.
Yeah, it is a competition. It's like the evolutionary arm, no matter how polite we become, like the fact that it's an evolutionary arms race, it's like, I don't know, what do we do at this point? Do we put like, caution tape around our nuclear missile silos? Like, how do we relate that, we feel bad and we're sorry, or that we're dangerous? I don't, what I mean? Like, it's like, there's so much baggage, like collectively speaking. And, to find self-reliance in an age where everyone wants to shackle you to that, because to me, that's vengeance. To me, vengeance is chaining you to the past and saying, no, you were destined to be that, Greg. You were destined to be an asshole or oppressor or asleep at the wheel or a piece of shit. Like, that's punishment. That's cruelty to me. That's the use and abuse of history. And that's the abuse and abuse of people. That's like political indoctrination and the like. It's a very dangerous territory. It hasn't necessarily been front and center in all our subject matter, but it's always been there, kind of secondary and tertiary on the side.
Yeah. And everyone's in that territory. Everyone's getting indoctrinated.
Oh yeah. It's the like, I put it like this: in modern times in the West, the personal becoming political. It's like, that's basically everyone going, okay, like we're in league with the government now. We're in bed with the government now. Like, we're all willing to be narcs and informants. That's what the personal becoming political means. It's like, okay, now I can weaponize every part of my identity against you or against your identity. Yeah, it's pathological. It's further division. If we were already divided before in our consciousness, in our minds, it's like, this is just exacerbating the problem. And, you've told me before, that people want to be lied to. And not only that, but they want to believe, as, they want to believe in them.
Yeah.
Even when someone knows they're being lied to, sometimes they choose not to question it, or they give up easily, and in a certain sense, I don't mean this cynically, we've hitherto, called we've called these lies religion, philosophy, politics. We still do. And we used to too. And art's included in there as well.
God.
Yep. And then, what is a lie? It's like, arguably, by their own dynamics, the liar, back to the point, is the perpetual slave. Whether it's out of self-preservation, whether it's out of fear, laziness, cowardice, it doesn't matter. Modern politics, it becomes the philosophy or battleground upon which this manifests. To me, I see it as a product of both Christian, like, it's not just Christianity and its ongoing existence in modern liberalism. It's also the moral value systems behind it all that actually is the framework of the liberal one, both the legal system, the kind of idealistic system, right? The philosophical system, all that stuff.
Well, let's make something clear here. It's not, I don't think it's a slave. It's a slave wearing master's clothes, right?
The liar. Oh yes, there,
Yeah.
there you go. That's actually a very important distinction. And I guess in theory, the liar could adopt anyone's clothes, but in
Yeah.
this case, yes, we're thinking, yeah, it's yeah, and then it's a question of what are the intentions. But again, okay, so why would, and then you could also question, well, why wouldn't they act that way if they see their contemporaries as oppressors or otherwise? What other way do you treat fundamentally what is an enemy?
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, if that is actually the case and that's what modern politics are, then it's like, okay, then this is the most passive aggressive war that has ever been fought then, or the most passive aggressive revolution, because enemies on that level necessitates violent revolution, right? Like usually
Yes.
when we speak of tyranny on that level, that's what we're actually talking about, like in
Yeah.
the Western tradition, at least in France and the US.
Yeah, like the French Revolution, the American Revolution.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're
Right. And to me, and again, the liberals would be in this case, like if this is eternal recurrence, then they've regressed to being the Christian cult in their infancy, and they're fighting back against Rome. They're bringing their vengeance to fruition on Rome, and Rome would be the conservatives who are going, wait, like you're part of us, or we've allowed you to exist here, and what's the problem? We don't understand. And like I said, it's not they just didn't understand either.
yeah. Yeah, because I mean, everyone's just confused, they're scared, and they're all just sitting down on death row.
Right. They can't, yeah. And they again, they're both like, they wind up being inadvertent victims and hostage to each other. And like, this is, in a sense, this has been some aspects of society and civility over time, and regardless of what anyone thinks or hopes, it's like no one's guaranteed the results, personally, collectively, societally, things can always get worse. That's true. And that's, it almost makes I would say it would make the ingratitude of modern Americans more clear. Like it would almost be more clear, when you consider it's the most protected and privileged class of people to ever exist. I think it's important. Like it was an important thing or important note you mentioned the other day. I think it was something like, what'd you say? You said that, people complain about not having freedom or losing freedom. And yet the reality is, in context of human history, we have more than ever before, enough that people don't even know what to do with themselves, would rather kill themselves or piss their lives away, in any number of means,
But I mean, someone like me, like an atheist.
Right. Well, we didn't evolve to handle any of this. It's not, there's no proof anywhere that we did, or even that we can. We're going to we're going to keep running these experiments because we have no options, right?
Yeah, I mean, try telling someone that God is dead in like year one. Yeah, see you later. You're on the crucifix.
yeah, for very different, for very similar yet different reasons.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, people get crucified today. I mean, not in a physical, literal sense, but in a
right. Well, and it's we, because again, it's the pretense to self-reliance. It's what I said before. It's a mythos. That notion of, it's funny that we the notion of the freedom of speech, because it's like no one actually likes it. People only like it when they can use it in service to their power. And it's like the moment other people can use it, it's like whoa, no, give it back. Like no, we don't want you to have it. It's like, and it's like art itself. That if it's powerful, then it's dangerous. Or if you think it's powerful, then you understand it's dangerous. And thinking is very much the same. But it's telling of us and our value system, that if this is the most protected and some of the most protected and privileged class of people to ever exist in the entirety of history, that they're the ones with the highest rates of mental illness, neuroticism, drug addiction. It is the country that produced Alcoholics Anonymous, perpetual societal unrest, cyclical sickness. And that's not like these things are unique to the Western world or even American. And, it'd be another philosophical jag to differentiate and work on, to that would be a whole nother paper, let's say, or a whole nother podcast to go in that direction. But this is what I'm saying is that self-reliance is risky. Conformity has always been the name of the game. It's only recently that we've even begun to understand this in any really coherent or honest sense, or I guess honest in a, I guess when I think naturalistic, I just mean when I think naturalistically, I think in terms of, again, it's just our best science. science. That's all. It's our best understanding to date.
So it's 6:27 p.m. and I'm thinking we gotta wrap this up. And I wanna go down because you wrote some of the best / most important lines from Self-Reliance. You wrote them down. And I want to kind of go over those real quick before we head out.
Oh yeah, I wrote the sentiments, not the exact quotes. Yeah, absolving yourself to yourself.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, you're going to feel that sense of duty. It's like, that's natural. That's a healthy instinct. The guilt and the consciousness and the tragic self-consciousness, all these things you may or may not feel, and also the seeking of their relief, right? This is just understanding the navigation of the labyrinth, right? It's understanding that you're going to feel obligation until you don't. And you're going to feel like you owe or like you're searching until you don't. Absolving yourself to yourself is, maybe it is the permission to go and play and search and maybe develop your own gay science. And maybe it's giving yourself the permission to have a certain amount of freedom, or to go explore, or to live your life as an experiment.
It's giving yourself the permission to be a self, to be something, right. To be someone.
Right. And to the degree it doesn't matter whether it is or isn't real, we're talking about it's just your expression. It's your being, like it may or may not run into me. It may or may not be a problem to or with me. It doesn't matter. That's not the purpose here. Again, society is a wave. Everyone talks performance or improvement. Nobody actually improves. That's just our cover. That's the easy way out. Why? Because we're lazy, because it's comfortable. And it's like, why should you listen? It is hard to listen or trust yourself when you see and understand just how weak that is. But that's to self-rely is to learn to trust that and to go, what exactly am I? Because when so much has been instilled to and from lies and error, and then you in turn have reacted to those lies and error, it's like, well, at that point, it's quite the complicated spider web. It's quite the knot to untangle. No wonder why we have a lot of mental illness. No wonder why we have a lot of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, then there's that. I mean, listen to yourself, right?
Yes. Listen to yourself, trust yourself, that good-natured inflexibility. There's no reason to, we've learned over time that despite the necessity of violence and this evolutionary arms race in our thought, in our being, in our body, in our minds, all these things, that we can be civilized.
Yeah. So there's also like trust yourself, listening to yourself, absolving you to yourself. These aren't new ideas. These are, in a sense, they're cliche. Cliche. But to actually do it, to actually act on it.
Right. As Emerson says, if a man thinks these laws are lax, let him try keeping. No, you see real quick, most people cannot be laws to themselves. Most people, historically to present, are followers. It's the great body bag of history. We can't remember those people. Why? They followed. They didn't want to, like as Emerson talks about in his other essays, they didn't want to give us their account. They didn't learn the language to do it. And maybe they didn't need to. Maybe they felt, and maybe that's more desirable. If you could be that simple and childlike, good, great.
So how self-reliance,
that's a good,
why self-reliance, when self-reliance, right? Well, however the fuck, whenever the fuck, and however the fuck you can. So
make use of all that's called fortune. The resources are there more than ever. Like you said, we have more. Don't believe it when people say whether self-reliance has failed or there's not enough freedom. It's like, don't believe it. We have more freedom than ever before in so many ways. And why would you then? It's suspicious to even limit yourself with such a belief. And then you go, okay, well, where did this come from? Who said it in the first place? And it's a long line of lamentations, because again, so much out of our old world's physiology is this same old tired, the end is nigh and we're so sick and sorry for ourselves and each other. It's a lot of Christian guilt and a lot of liberal guilt.
Yeah. Back in the day, you can get stoned to death for your beliefs. Now people just insult you. It's so, right. So you have more freedom in the world to be self-reliant than any other time ever in human history. So. Yeah.
Right. But, you see, and I guess, but Bukowski's dream would be probably most everyone's nightmare, because I don't remember if it's poem title or a book title, but he's got this line, something along the lines of sometimes you feel so alone, or you get so alone it just feels right. That's a lot of people's nightmare, because again, we're social animals. But then again, if we seem to rub on each other so much, then again, the need of self-reliance, especially when you can't depend or trust the people around you, especially if they're sick, it is a means of self-protection,
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that sums it up.
Right. So remember, whatever your hopes are for the future, don't believe it. Who and what are you otherwise betraying now?
Yeah.
Like, don't sublimate.
Because if you do believe it, then you're not going to take action and make it happen. So.
Right. Well, again, false desires, right? Like, did we ever want it all along, or was this the dream that we bought from someone else? Who installed it? Like, whose vision was this? Where were we even headed again? What was the purpose of all this? Like, didn't society had a goal? Was it that someone was supposed to come back and save us by now? Like, we didn't think the repercussions of our actions would catch up to us, like humanity over time,
Yeah. Well, dissolve unto yourself.
Absolve.
Yourself, listen.
Absolve.
Absolve.
Yeah, we don't want you to dissolve. We don't want you to become nothingness. No, we're not seeking any kind of, self-destruction here.
Yep. Be self-reliant, and not just because I told you to. Right.
Yeah, it'd be the real self-reliant. Yeah. That's a good place to end it, man.
Yeah. So that ends it. That totally ends the Self-Reliant series. I promise we won't bring it up again. But well, we will, but we won't do a whole episode about it again, at least not for a while. But I mean, it's probably the most important topic as far as actions go with philosophy. As far as living your own philosophy, I think it's probably the most important topic.
Yeah. It's again the measuring stick, or the weighting things with the proper amounts.
So go check out bezabazaar.com. Go check out into-the-absurd.com for the latest updates on the show. And just a little housekeeping, go check out the Nietzsche podcast. It comes out every Tuesday. I think I'm either going to be on it this upcoming Tuesday or the Tuesday after that. I'm not sure. We already recorded, but I'm not 100% sure when he's going to post it out. So anyways, thank you very much for listening, and have a good one.